Real quick, everybody, just so that you kind of know. So today is our panel with Tab. So, hi Tab. So quick background, Tab is a screenwriter, worked on Hunchback of Notre Dame, Atlantis, Tarzan, Brother Bear, all the fun stuff. Quick rules for just this panel. Please keep your microphones muted the whole time. And try to use the chat only for questions for him so that at the end I have all of them, we can ask them and get through as many as possible. Also, this is being recorded for anybody who misses it, and I will make sure that I upload it to YouTube or something so that you guys have the link. Otherwise, the floor is yours, the digital floor.
Floor is mine? No, floor. It is mine. Oh, well, listen, first of all, I just want to say that I'm really pleased to be here and have an opportunity to chat about movies that for the longest time I thought everybody forgot about. So this is really kind of cool. You know, I had a good run at Disney back in the day, but so I am Tab Murphy, and I'm here to, you know, talk about you know, those movies, my career, whatever you guys want to talk about. So, you know, I don't know if it's a Q&A out of the gate, or how do you want me to, do you want me to just ramble?
I'll start talking about like your work and just like screenwriting in general.
Yep, sure. Well, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. So I went to film school in the mid 70s at USC, but I didn't really know. I mean, my first year at college was at Washington State University because I, you know, erroneously believed that I wanted to be a forest ranger. So I kind of got that out of my system real quick, and just had one of those sort of defining moments when I, you know, kind of looked myself in the mirror at a very young, you know, 19 years of age and said, well, what do you really want to do with your life? I mean, and the answer kind of surprised me because it was, you know, wanted to go to Hollywood and get into making movies because I'd always loved movies and always loved writing, creative writing, that is. So, and that's what, so you know, I sort of quit Washington State University. I transferred down to USC Film School, and it's kind of started there. I went to film school, and I had you know, for a couple of years, and probably the thing that really set me on my path in those early years of film school was that I took a screenwriting course from a gentleman named Jim Boyle, and he wasn't a screenwriter, but you know, you don't always have to be you know, doing the thing you can be an expert at a little bit, you know what I mean? So he loved movies, and he just knew how to teach screenwriting in a way that, you know, like I, you know, never learned before, which was really cool for me. So for instance, he would, you know, he would have us all go watch a movie on the weekend, and then on Monday we'd come to class, and he'd say, okay, like the lead character of the movie, everybody take out a sheet of paper. I want you to, in your mind, I want you to walk into his or her kitchen. I want you to open the refrigerator door, and I want you to list everything in the refrigerator. Go. You know what I mean? And that you had to really like think about characters other than just two-dimensional people. You had or caricatures. You had to think about, who is this guy about, or what is this woman about, and what would she have in a refrigerator, and how do we define her through things like that, you know? So it really just it caused me to think about screenwriting in particular in a very different way. And also Jim kind of took me under his wing a little bit and said, hey, you know, because everybody at film school, including the, you know, the professors, wanted to be directors in those days. I mean, you know, Star Wars had just come out, and it, you know, like it was like everybody was like, I want to make movies. And so Jim said, you know, to me, which I did, I wanted to make movies. He said, the quickest way, you know, to the director's chair is to be able to write a good script. And so I took him to heart, maybe a little too much to heart, because I quit. I actually quit film school, and I I, got a crappy apartment, not too far from Universal Studios, right down, not too far from here actually. And I started writing screenplays, and I got a, shitty job at a 7-Eleven, and I started writing screenplays, and that was really how it kind of started for me. Um, and then there was a progression, like, of frustration, and I'll never make it, and I'm delivering potato chips now, and God, this is crazy. So all those levels of frustration when you're first starting out, that you think everybody else is getting a break but you and the world, and all that stuff. But I did write a script, and I was kind of hung out with a group of writers, all wannabe screenwriters at the time. There were like 6 of us. And so this is, if there's any kind of advice I could give to any burgeoning screenwriters at this stage of your career or life, is to try to find some like-minded, people to hang with, because writing is such a lonely thing to do anyway. And so we would meet once a week at this burger joint and have cold beers and burgers, and then we would uh, talk about what we were working on. And we would talk about movies we'd seen. We'd talk about things we loved, things we hated. We shared scenes, and so it was very fertile in terms of just like creativity, and so, to make a long story even longer, I mean short, one of the guys in that group had a friend who was an executive at Paramount Studios. I had finished the script. He said, "Can I read it?" I said, "Sure." He came into the 7-Eleven, my friend, and said, that was great, man. Do you mind if I show it to my friend at Paramount, who's an executive?" I said, "What? No, of course. Yes, please do." And so that really was that moment was kind of the moment that set me on my path, because they read it. They had me in for a meeting. I didn't even have an agent. I'm literally driving down to Paramount, taking off my 7-Eleven shirt, like going into this meeting thinking, "Oh my God, Tab, don't be a fool. Don't say something stupid," And, but it was great. They were like, "Hey, we really love the script. We have this reader here." I'll never forget this. They said, "We have this reader here at Paramount. He's like 110 years old. He used to read scripts for John Wayne, and he fucking hates everything," you know. And they said, "But he loved your script, man." So I was like, and so that's why they had me in, because this guy never likes anything. He never endorses anything. So we had to meet you. So it was fun. It was funny, and then they said, "We're going to keep our eye on you. Keep writing." And then a week later, I got a call out of the blue from an agent at William Morris, who said, "Yeah, this executive over at Paramount sent me the script and said, you and I ought to have lunch." So it's like, I mean, it's just like this kind of, snowball thing that got bigger and bigger, and eventually, turned into a career finally. So it was cool. It was cool. Those were fun days. But I always, when I hear somebody starting out, and I hear it, you can hear the same things, because I said them all. Fuck, this is so frustrating. I'm never going to get a job. And how do I break in? How do I get an agent? How do I do this? This is because I speak to a lot of young writers, and it's just like, hearing myself, 40 years ago, right? And the answer is, you just do. That you just do. You find a way, man. It's like that, it's like Jurassic Park. Nature finds a way. Screenwriters find a way to get jobs. They just do. No story is the same. It's everybody has their path. You know, I mean, so it's just one of those things. It's like persistence, perseverance, you know, and constantly creating material, and just, about the time you're going to give up and say, "Fuck this, I'm going to go, work at whatever, Walmart, the rest of my life. I don't care. I'm just so frustrated." I always used to think, when I got to that place, and I did, because everybody does when they're starting out, I always used to think the story of the guy who was the gold miner, right? and he tunneled and he tunneled and he tunneled and he never found gold, and he tunneled, and he said one day, he just said, ah, shit, I give up. I'm leave, forget it. He sold his tools to the next guy, and the next guy went in and he took one whack with a pick and he discovered a vein of gold, you know? So it's like that always taught me never give up. I mean, never, like, I mean, obviously, not everything is meant, not everybody is meant for everything, but if you feel like inherently that you're on the right path, man, you just gotta hang in there. You just gotta hang in there. Anyway, okay, I didn't expect to ramble on that much, so sorry about that.
No worries. So somebody asked about your time at Disney and what that was like for you. So if you want to talk about maybe some of the films and just working with the company a little bit, that'd be really cool.
Okay, well, Disney was an interesting, this is another kind of life lesson I learned in my career, which is that, it's very easy to sort of have tunnel vision about what you want. And sometimes, and you're working and you're hard and you're focused and but sometimes that tunnel vision is inhibiting you from perhaps having something else kind of come out of left field. When you say, no, I just want to do this, I don't want to do anything else, I'm just doing this, I'm going to bear down and I'm going to work until I get this, because sometimes inspiration doesn't, or opportunity doesn't come up and just grab you by the throat. You know what I mean? Sometimes it just whispers in your ear like an annoying mosquito, and you keep going, boom, boom, get out of here, get out of here. And that was my relationship with Disney in the beginning, because the first job I ever got was writing a screenplay, a couple of scripts for Eddie Murphy at Paramount. And at the time, the guy I wrote them for, the executive, was Jeffrey Katzenberg. So like a couple of years later, he moved over, and as did Michael Eisner, and that whole regime ran Disney, and Jeffrey in particular ran the animation division. And he kept, through his executives, trying to get me to come in and have a meeting to possibly write something for that division, the animation division at Disney. And I was like, at the time, had tunnel vision, man, because I was like, I want to be a director. I was trying to get a live action movie that I'd written off the ground. And so I kept saying no. I kept saying nah. And also, like, I, stupidly, like, thought, I don't want to write cartoons, man. I don't want to write kid stuff. I wanted to write, I wanted to be an important filmmaker. I wanted to write meaningful stuff. I wanted to write good, like really gritty, good, like all this stuff I thought of myself as. So those were easy no's, for me at that period. So, I have the dubious distinction of having turned down Toy Story. I also turned down, let's see, what else? I know, I just saw Trisha just winced. Well, I have to say, in my defense in those days, the way it was put to me was I went to lunch with an executive from Disney, and I said, hey, we just bought this little company, and we're going to make our first CGI animated movie. And it's about a boy and his talking toys. Are you interested? And I'm like, and he said the caveat is you have to move to Marin County for 2 years at least. And I was like, so that was an easy pass for me, because I was trying to get a movie off the ground and all that stuff. So, hindsight is 2020, of course. And once in a while I wonder if I had written Toy Story, what my life or career would be like. But you know what? I'd have no regrets about the way I eventually landed at Disney, because a few months after that meeting, the movie that I was trying to get financed got financed. We got a lead actor, but he had like 2 movies to do ahead of ours. We were in line, so we had to wait. So I had this window of about 9 months before we could even go into pre-production on that movie. And I needed a job, man. And, like a lot of people forget that, that the one half of 1% of screenwriters that, you know, like are making all the millions of dollars, which, and writing all the big movies. It's awesome and good for those guys, those men and women. But for most of us, it's just like a blue collar job in the sense that we have bills to pay every month. You know, we have to work, you know. So the question I also get from young screenwriters is like, they look at my credits and they go, ooh, why did you write that? And I always laugh because I had, you know, kids who needed to eat, man. There's a reality, you know, there's a certain reality to being a writer. It's not always like, oh, I'll only write what I want to write when I want to write it, you know. No, that shit don't fly when you got kids and you got, you know, like, you know, so anyway, I had this window of opportunity and Disney called again. And this time I said, Tab, why don't you just go in? You know, it's that mosquito that been buzzing around my ear. I finally just said, okay, go in. You need a job. Let's, you know, you've worked with Jeffrey. Let's see what they got. Let's go in. So I went in and I had a very cool meeting. And again, in that meeting though, and I don't want to make myself out as some prima donna, but you know, when I agree to like throw in on a project or write something, I got to be jazzed about it. I got to feel passionate about it. I got to see the potential for it. I got to have some connection to it. You know what I mean? Like there has to be something. I just can't, it's very difficult for me to just say yes to something to collect a paycheck. Now, has that ever happened in my career? Yeah, of course. Sometimes it does. But, you know, I went in there, I really wanted to find something to do. And there was nothing coming across the table. So, you know, they were trying to develop Hercules at the time. They were trying to develop a few other projects. And I was like kind of getting depressed. And I was like, I'm going to have to tell these guys no again for like the third or fourth time, you know. And then all of a sudden, at the end of the meeting, David Stainton, who was an executive there, said, and we're also trying to figure out something to do with this. And this happened to be Victor Hugo's Hunchback of Notre Dame. So now, again, anybody that knows me knows that I grew up, I was a monster kid from the 60s. You know what I mean? I was a total monster nerd. I loved all the Universal monster movies. I mean, you know, I would stay up late and watch Nightmare Theater. And in those days, and I collected monster magazines. And so in those days, in the mid 60s, up and through the, you know, the canon of Universal monsters included the Hunchback. So it was Frankenstein, Wolfman, the Mummy, the Hunchback. Even though the Hunchback isn't, he's not a monster, he's a man, but still he was part of that canon. And so I was very familiar with that story. I was very familiar with that tragic character. And when they said that, I didn't even hesitate. I said, yes, I'll do it. I don't care. I'll do it. Whatever you want me to do, I'm in. I'm in. So that's how Hunchback, that's how we started on Hunchback. And it was a very challenging project because if you've ever even attempted to read Victor Hugo's, you know, big novel, it's just a story fraught with adult themes. I mean, it's just very adult. It's very tragic, and it's just. And I'm like thinking, yay, they want to do this, but how the fuck? It's Disney. How are they going to do this, man? I mean, it's like whoa. So my first, you know, my marching orders from them was because they were like, we love this story, but we just don't know if there's a Disney movie here. We really honestly don't know. So my marching orders were to go find the Disney movie in Victor Hugo's novel. And so it was, wow, it was daunting because you know, like, I mean, you know, I was aware of Disney's, you know, brand, and you know, you have to make, you can't just eviscerate, you know, a novel, especially a classic novel like that, of all of its, you know, of what makes it great in order to sort of pander to a young audience. So I was like, to them, I was like, you know, I'm not really interested in making a bunch of singing and dancing musical feel good moments that you're going to call Hunchback of Notre Dame, because that's not what this book is about. And to their credit, I have to say, and that goes from the executives all the way up to the, like the studio heads, they were like, no man, no man, you don't get it. We want you to go dark. Because you just write what you write, and we'll pull back wherever we need to. You let us worry about our brand. You go write the movie you want to write. But the challenge was it had to be animated. So how was I going to create something or give them something that they could look at? Because Disney in those days, and to this day I'm sure, they had a lot of boxes you had to check off before they would sort of agree that this could be an animated movie for them. So I mean, I was like, there was a list of like 10 boxes. I checked the first one off, and then I stared at the other 9. I was like, holy shit, I don't know how I'm going to do this. But it was, but it, it, I think the turning point for me and the way I started to think about the movie was, okay, we have a character stuck up in this gloomy bell tower, and all of these, sad, tragic things have happened to him and continue to happen to him with his relationship with Frollo. And, I had to streamline the book, but I also had to, like, where is the magic? Where is the color? Where's the life? Where is the hope? Where in that story? And so the first thing I remember thinking was, what if Quasimodo, yes, he lived up in this gloomy bell tower, but what if he had this rich internal fantasy world, this life that like even in that gloomy bell tower came alive to him in a way that led to the gargoyles, and that led to like a lot of choices that everybody made creatively and artistically in terms of the cathedral and where Quasimodo was kept, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, when I finally I mean, I worked really hard on that outline because I love that story so much, and I turned it in, and Jeffrey called me and he said, I just read your treatment for the Hunchback. He said, I'm greenlighting the movie off this treatment. I'm just letting you know. I'm greenlighting it. We're making this fucking thing. And I was like, wow, that was the coolest thing I'd ever heard, on a phone call, literally. I mean, it was like, and then they went out and they got, he literally, Kirk and Gary, who directed the movie, and Don Hahn, who produced it, were literally working on another project that they were developing to make. And he literally called them up and said, boys, drop what you're doing. You're doing the Hunchback of Notre Dame. So I got those guys from fresh off of Beauty and the Beast, and then it was like, it was awesome. It was a great, and the thing that made it awesome for me, as in terms of just as we started to work together, I started to work together with those guys. They were very cool about letting me come to a lot of meetings, story meetings, storyboard. So you'd go, and I'd never worked with artists before like that, and it was just the most fun I'd ever had. I mean, as a writer, it was just the most fun I'd ever had, because we weren't working with executives. You were working with artists and directors and creators, and oh my God, I mean, the talent around the table in those days at Disney was just scary. I mean, scary. I would sit there and say, so I have this idea for this little bit where Quasimodo does this and does this and does that, and Frollo comes in and does this, and you kind of finish pitching the idea, and you turn around and somebody says, like this, and he's already done these sketches, and he's like flipping them like a flip book, and I'm like, holy shit, man. I mean, like, it's just like that immediate, or you would write scenes, and you'd come in for a meeting 2 days later, and all the boards would be up on the wall, and it was just so I was just juiced. I was so excited to be working in that kind of creatively fertile environment, which is why I did 3 more. I mean, I spent 10 years, almost 11 years writing those movies because I had so much fun. It certainly wasn't because I was getting rich doing it. I had fun creatively, and I loved working with the people there, and they were, Disney. I got really lucky because I kind of landed in a spot where Disney was trying to do something different on the movies, at least that I wrote. So they were trying to do something different with Hunchback. Tarzan was a little more straightforward, but they certainly were trying to do something different with Atlantis, and not always. And the things I wrote weren't always that successful, frankly, at the box office. But artistically, I don't I, you know I'm still so proud of those movies.
That's awesome. Helen managed, she's a screenwriting minor, so she actually has been thinking about this since.
Make it a major, Helen. Make it a major.
And she has some questions about screenwriting specifically, so I'm going to let her kind of
Oh, awesome.
away.
Yeah. Thank you, Trisha. So what was your experience writing for like live action dramas? Because I know you wrote Gorillas in the Mist compared to like family animated musicals.
Well, in those days, there was a big difference, especially working for Disney. But um, so it's you know the first real break, when I look at my career and I think about what was the first thing that really, I mean, everybody's first job is great, but getting paid to write something and actually getting something made is so different and so hard and so difficult. So for me, my break came about, I want to say 4 years into my career, and that's a career where I was working and on unemployment for a while, then working again and on unemployment for a while. But then I got called to by some producers I'd worked with and read me and knew me and said, "Hey, we got a script. We need a script on a project really quick." And so we don't have a lot of money, but here's the project. And these guys had a deal at Warner Brothers, and the project turned out to be Gorillas in the Mist. So that was a really intense project at a particular time in my career, and the difference between working on that project and say when I finally went to work with Disney is that working at Disney, I mean, like writing Gorillas in the Mist, I was alone in a shitty apartment on Riverside Drive here in LA, and I was just like, writing alone, and you just don't know if you just trust your instincts, and you have great material, you have a great character, so you're really, but I'm young, and I'm like, I don't have the seasoned, sort of like 20 years experience behind me, so I was really nervous about that, but I just sort of trusted my instincts, and I knew I had a great character. Plus, I'm an animal freak, and I love animals, and so this woman dedicating her life to study these gorillas and then ultimately to saving them was just right in my wheelhouse, man. So I got that. But again, screenwriting for live action movies is a pretty lonely affair. It's a pretty lonely way to make a living. The difference when you go to work, or when I worked at Disney, was that you had such an amazing support net around you of creatively talented people. Yes, I still had to go do the writing, but I would go in and have meetings, and you'd be with people and you'd interact, and in that room stuff would be born that would make it into the script because it was just so good, so fun. So the word is collaboration, huge collaboration. When you write an animated feature, and I'm sure it's still the same. When you write an animated feature, you're never sort of sitting alone writing it. You're sitting with a bunch of people, not literally, but there's a bunch of people that have contributed to whatever it is you're going to come up with and ultimately write. And that, yeah, so that's again, that kind of creative collaboration was just so much fun. It was like a high, man. I was like on a drug for like 4 movies, and I got used to it. I got used to that. So going back to live action, you go back to like, oh right, yeah, okay, they tell you to go away for 3 months and bring them back something brilliant. So there's not that sort of daily, that 2 times, 3 times a week, even while you're writing the script, you go into these meetings and you see what the artists are doing, you see what they're dreaming up, and it's just so much fun. So that, I guess, what I'd say is that Animation is an extremely collaborative, and I'll give you a good example too, because on Hunchback, I was the only writer on that for probably the first 15 or 16 months. So I worked exclusively with the producer and the directors, and it was just the four of us. And I would write, and I did that through outlines and treatments, and then a couple of drafts of the script. And then I remember coming in to the usual meeting on Wednesday, I think it was, and coming into the room, and there's like two people in there I'd never seen before. I'm like, oh, who are these guys? Well, they're writers, man. We just hired them to work on the scripts. And I'm like, what do you mean you just, in my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, this is my movie. You can't bring on other writers. You know, you kind of get, you get that kind of like, you get possessive about it a little bit. But then it's like, you realize that they throw a lot of interesting people, there's a lot of people that are invited into that sandbox to make those movies, and not just a single writer. So there's so you learn. I had to learn very quickly to be collaborative, check the ego at the door kind of thing, and it turns out they were awesome. They were great. I mean, we all, sort of like spitballed around the table and read scenes, and it was terrific. And so that's why very rarely do you see an animated film with just one writer credit. It's usually shared. I think on Hunchback, they gave me a single card on Hunchback, animation story by me, as a thank you for cracking a way to make it an animated movie. But I share a screenplay credit with like Bob and Noni and Jonathan and one other, I think. So Irene. So there was a bunch of us on it for screenplay. I think Atlantis actually was the only Disney movie that I worked on that I actually got a single screenplay credit. No, I didn't share it with anybody else, so that was kind of cool. Well, that was a different story, though. That was a whole different animal, than Hunchback in a lot of ways. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's so insightful. And it kind of leads to like another one of my questions is like earlier you mentioned like adapting Hunchback from the book. Also Tarzan and Atlantis, it comes from like stories too. When adapting a screenplay from a book, do you try to stick as close as possible or just pull your favorites and like use it as inspiration?
Well, it all depends on the book. I mean, it all depends. I'm launching into an adaptation right now for a miniseries. So and the book is terrific. Some books are really terrific, but they're not terrific screenplays if you simply adapt the book. Some books are easy adaptations. I mean, not easy, but like I adapted Frank Miller's Batman Year One, his graphic novel comic, uh, for Warner Brothers, and it for a sort of direct to DVD hour 80-minute long thing, and you don't fuck around with Frank, man. I mean, like people revered that comic, so I was smart enough to know I don't need to invent a bunch of stuff here. This is a great story. It's fans love it. Fans love him. And I don't need to show everybody, oh, I'm going to, write a new scene or a better scene than Frank wrote. So that was, in my mind, that was an easy adaptation because, yeah, I formatted it and I turned it into a screenplay, and those are my words and scene description and things. And I jiggle a little tiny bit of dialogue, but that was Frank, man. So that was so again, sometimes you read a book that just has an amazing idea or amazing character, but you realize, man, there's just a lot of stuff I'm going to have to cut out, and you really to find the story in this book. So for me anyway, every adaptation is different. It all depends. I mean, after I did Gorillas in the Mist, I adapted a couple of books written by a South African writer, English writer, who was an explored South Africa and the Kalahari Desert. Sir Lawrence Vanderpost was his name, and he wrote a couple of books called A Story Like the Wind in a Far Off Place. They were two books, and they dealt with, it was an adventure story about a young boy whose family they farm out on the edge of the Kalahari Desert, and they are progressive because they share the farm with the Botswanan people, and then these rebels come in and they massacre everybody, and this boy takes off across the desert and befriends a bushman of the Kalahari, and he goes on this adventure, this long trek. And I love that book, man. I love that book. So, and it was so visual, and it just was so evocative and everything. There again, sometimes you make trims just to fit it into a 2-hour movie. But again, I was using a lot of what he had already written because I loved it so much, So I think the thing you really have to do, you kind of have to, and I've said this before when it came to working at Disney, but it also, when you're adapting a book, actually when you're writing anything, because you gotta work with people, man. So a lot of times you just have to sort of put your ego on hold. This isn't about me. This isn't about, this is about writing the best version of this book possible. How can I help that author if it needs help? Where can I step aside and let that author speak through my writing, because he's already or she's already written an amazing book, right? So a lot of it is that, it's a lot of it because, you get some people who feel like, oh, they have an opportunity to show the world what they can do, when in fact an adaptation is really about, in my mind, especially if you're adapting something that's revered, or like Victor Hugo or Sir Lawrence Vanderpost or Frank Miller, it's about honoring the reason you're even adapting it. You know what I mean? And letting that voice, be heard through those pages and through that screenplay. So that's how I do it anyway. Somebody might say, "Oh, you're fucking nuts, Ted. Are you crazy?" Anything else?
Yeah, we have some questions in the chat. This one's from Paul, and it says, where do you find the inspiration for writing something about a place or time in history that you're unfamiliar with? Where does research overlap with a compelling story?
Okay, just that came at me so fast. Can you just repeat it? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, totally. Where do you find the inspiration for writing something about a place or time in history that you're unfamiliar with? Where does research overlap with a compelling story?
Wow, that's a very prescient question, because that's exactly what I'm doing right now. I read a book not too long ago that knocked me out, and it was based on a true story. And the book is called Astoria, and it's a story about. It takes place a few years after Lewis and Clark went across the continent. And it was, and the players in this story are just amazing. John Jacob Astor was a sort of a fur magnate who lived in New York City, and he sort of collaborated a little bit with Thomas Jefferson in this idea of creating a trading post at the mouth of the Columbia River, way out across the continent. And for Thomas Jefferson, it was about, planting an American flag on the West Coast and ultimately defining how big this country was going to be. He envisioned a coast-to-coast country. He didn't want the British coming in, the French coming in, anybody else coming in, and having to share a border. He wanted the border to be the Pacific Ocean. So he supported Astor's plan, and John Jacob Astor wanted to build an empire, where a trade empire that he would, his ships would be trading with Russia, would be trading with China, would be trading with London, and all sort of like based out of this idyllic, not idyllic, but this ideal of a big trading post at the mouth of the Columbia River. So he sent an overland expedition. He sent an expedition by ship around Cape Horn. They were all supposed to meet at the Columbia River and establish this post. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. And it is, I mean, it did and it didn't. It is this story that very few people know, number one. And, but it's also a story, unlike, Lewis and Clark, who basically, I would characterize their journey as a walk in the park compared to what these two, journeys had to endure. So it was, I mean, Lewis and Clark lost one man, I think, on the entire trek out and back. These guys lost 61 men in a few short months. I mean, it's just like, so it's a great story of survival. It's a great story of ambition, of greed, of empire. It's a world sort of story, but it's also very small characters and dealing with, so there's a lot going on in this story. So, but I read the book. I optioned it because I loved it so much. Ironically, my parents live in Olympia, Washington, and I was in Jackson Hole at the time, and I got this guy on the phone, the author, and from what I understood, he lived in Montana, and he said, I said, well, maybe I'm in Jackson Hole, maybe I can drive up and have a cup of coffee with you. We can talk about this amazing story you wrote. He said, well, that'd be great, but I'm not there. I'm actually on this little island in southern Puget Sound, right near Olympia, Washington. I said, holy shit, you can look down the bay and see my parents' house. I said, so I actually went out to my parents and stayed with them for 3 weeks, and spent a lot of time with this author. So so that's not really the answer to your question. It's, again, the answer to the question is, I got a hell of a lot of research I'm doing right now. I'm reading all sorts of books about this subject, okay? And because there's so many characters, and we envision a 10-hour miniseries, so but again, I'm going to have to disseminate all of this information I'm getting. I'm going to have to trim the cast of characters. I'm going to have to write something that's affordable to make in the eyes of producers, and not something that's so sprawling and so big they're just like, oh, it's great, Tab, but no way, we're not touching it, man. We can't afford it. So all of those things come into play, all of those things, all of those considerations. So again, every project is different. Um, if you, yeah, I mean, like if you were writing simply like The Revenant a few years ago, that story about, that Leonardo DiCaprio won the Academy Award for, that's a very select, specific story that occurred during that fur trade era. So, the research for that particular story probably not is as, like what I'm facing, because, I've already got, like, this is only 3 books. I've got another 5 back in the, that I've, so it all depends. It all depends on what kind of historical epic you're trying to tell in terms of research. But if there is a point, I will say, there is a point where you could just over-research the shit out of something. Usually that happens when I'm scared to start writing. Usually I go, oh, I need to write another book, or I need to read another book, or I need to do this, or I need to go visit this, or I need to see that. And, when I've already done so much to it, what it usually is telling me is that I'm scared and nervous to start, because it just feels like such a big project. So sometimes I just have to, like, fuck it, and sit down and start doing something that I know I do pretty well, and kind of, so that's the other thing too. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and when you sit at your computer and you're staring at a blank screen, and the little cursor is there blinking, mocking you, or I don't think it's a cursor these days. In the old days it was. We all start with the same blank page, man, and it's daunting. And it's like any performer who will tell you that they go out on stage, before they go out, and this may be their 500th play they've ever done, they still get butterflies, they still get nervous. So I still get my type of butterflies and nervous when I stare at that blank page before I start a project. It never changes, that never goes away. So, but it's nervous good energy. It's not nervous terrible energy where I'm, like, oh my God, I'm gonna have writer's block for a year.
That's awesome. So we actually do have a student that's majoring in screenwriting, Stephen.
Excellent.
So that's pretty awesome. And then we had another question, which may or may not be the last one. But it is, what habits or traits do you find in successful animation screenwriters?
Well, I mean, I mean, the answer right out of the gate is visual, 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 visual. I mean, you know, I did a podcast with one of the directors, not a podcast, but a Zoom thing with one of the directors of Atlantis the other day. And, you know, we were talking about all of the things that go into a scene in an animated movie. I mean, it is like, it's like you know, the screenwriter comes in and think of the scene as a building. The screenwriter comes in and lays a solid foundation for that scene, right? Then all these artists and everybody else and board artists and story artists and effects people, they start to build this. You know, they build upon that foundation until the scene looks like this bright, shiny building. Because the truth is, if you wrote everything in, pick a scene from an animated movie, if you wrote everything as a screenwriter that happens in that scene, that scene alone would probably be 20 pages. And then there's like, how many scenes in a movie? So if you wrote an animated movie into a screenplay with not leaving out any of the little things that happen and the way people walk and they talked and they did all the funny bits and all that stuff, that thing would be 250 pages long, man. It would be 250. I'm serious. So we were laughing about that because, you know, I mean, I get, you know, I get credited a lot, especially by fans, with, oh, you wrote Atlantis, that line, I love that line you wrote, blah, blah. And then I have to say, well, you know what? I'm glad you like that line. I'm glad you like the movie, but I didn't write that line. Or that piece of business over there, Tarzan's a good example. I wrote, you know, if whoever's seen the movie, do you remember the moment where Jane is in the jungle, kind of alone for the first time, and that little baby monkey comes up, and she's kind of fooling around with it, and then she's like, "Shoo, shoo, go away," you know, and then she looks up, and there's the angry mother there. Well, it's not just the angry mother; it's the whole frickin' tribe of baboons, right? So I wrote the scene where it ended there, you know, where she kind of like backed out and said it was just an angry mother, and she backed out and kind of like, oh, sorry, he's a sweet little boy or whatever. Well, the animators and the storyboard artists, that was their jumping off point to an entire sequence. If you remember the chase through the jungle and the grabbing of, well, actually, I wrote the grabbing of Jane by Tarzan, and that was their first meeting, and she screams. But then it pretty much ended right after that. They took off and made it into this huge sequence that's exciting and thrilling, and the skateboarding down the vines and the big log crashing down and at the very end, the little monkey coming down, the baboon with the Jane's parasol, bitching out Tarzan and him talking to her, you know, she didn't know better, you know? But that's the, you know, I can't remember what the question was, but that's the
Um, it was just what you find trait-wise in successful screenwriters. But I'm gonna,
yeah, for animation, it's definitely thinking visually. It's definitely the ability to write visually. I mean, you know, screenwriting is such a, you know, everybody thinks screenwriting is easy because, oh, they look at a screenplay and go, oh, fuck, this isn't a lot of writing. This is not like a novel. This is not like a, you know, this could be pretty easy. And wait a minute, I grew up watching movies. I must know how to do this. You know, I mean, that's what a lot of people get into it, and then they just get into it, and then they go, whoa, this is not as easy as I thought. But you know, in terms of animation, it's really about writing visually. And I that's a term, and I know I can throw it out there, but it's really something. It's like when I write scenes, especially in those Disney movies, I watch them in, I have this little movie screen in my mind. When I sit down to start writing and I think of a scene, I watch the scene, I watch it unfold on the screen in my mind And then I start to figure out how, because let's say it's a scene from Brother Bear, and it's how Kenai turns into a bear, and it's all this, all this stuff, and all the rainbow. So you can't write all that stuff. So you have to be, as a writer, very selective about the words you choose. You have to choose words and sentences and moments, and you grab those things out of a scene that ultimately gives the reader the sense of the whole. You don't write the whole. You can't write it all. So you have to tease, and you have to create an impression on the page that somebody reading it can see it unfolding in the screens in their mind. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, so it's really about being very selective about how you describe things, the words you choose, the emotions you're trying to convey in as short of, prose as possible, and that just takes experience. It takes time. I mean, when I don't teach screenwriting, but absolutely, I'm part of writers conferences and things like that. So the biggest mistake I see young screenwriters make, whether it's animation uh, or live action, is that that their pages are just you know dark with prose, dark with lots of blocks of dialogue, and it's like, when you start flipping through and you see a lot of reading you have to do in a screenplay, that's when okay, this is somebody that needs to learn how to, like, you almost have to learn a visual language, because that's what screenwriting is. It's speaking in a visual language. It's screenwrite. All screenplay is a blueprint for a director to see a movie. It's the blueprint for it. So you don't have to build the whole thing yourself. You just have to write a good blueprint, that excites somebody, that gets somebody jazzed. And that's, I know that's kind of like, it's, not really nuts and bolts, but it is what good screenwriting is. It's the ability to write visually and write great characters. And like, anybody that works in Hollywood as a reader or reads a lot of screenplays will tell you, like, if they're not hooked by page 5, boom, they move on. That's not a lot of time to get somebody invested in your story, in your script. So it's that's but that's the reality. That's the reality.
All right. So one last question, because I know you have to go pretty soon.
I have to go, but we can do another one if you want, because there's a lot to talk about.
Absolutely, yeah. So this final question is going to be, I'm going to kind of mix the last two together. So the first part is, should screenwriting students take animation classes of any sort to kind of help with writing? And then what would you recommend as a solid work ethic in terms of like how long you spend writing a week?
Not my work ethic, I'll tell you that. No, I listen. Look. I mean, writers write. Okay, so yeah, yeah, writers write, and somebody will say to you, "Oh, writers should write every day," and somebody will say to you, "Oh, you should just stay strapped in that chair no matter what and get it done," and all that sort of stuff. And that sort of rah 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 kind of college football mentality to screenwriting was something I never adopted. I do it because I love it. I love it, and I love going into worlds and spending time in these worlds with the characters that I spend. Uh, a lot of times, my motivation is because it's a job. Because I grew up in a blue collar work ethic, and like, when you have a job, you better get it done, and so you have a deadline, you better meet it. I mean, that kind of thing. Um, Left to my own devices, I have fun doing a lot of stuff, man. So, I mean, not to say that writing doesn't take a back seat. It just means that I go out and do a bunch of stuff that ultimately will inform, hopefully, my writing someday, but maybe that's a complete rationalization. I don't know, but I usually, if I work intensely on a project for 2, 3, or 4 months, I usually take a month off. I usually, unless I'm rolling right into something else that I've already got backlogged, I usually go off and do shit that I like to do, and you know, go out and live, because I think it's too easy to get so focused and work so hard all the time, and writing really is an expression of the lives we live, you know. Good writing is really an expression, even if you're writing a story of Tarzan or this or that. The reason I look back on all the 4 of those Disney movies, and the reason I love those movies, is because I had a personal connection to every single one of them. You know, like through Hunchback, I told you about being a kid and loving that character. Tarzan was not only that, but I mean the idea of it, of living out in the wilderness and being free, and I grew up in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, so I loved that character and watched those movies when I was a kid. Atlantis was all about adventure, which is something I've pursued, you know, most of my life, trying to find stuff that was fun and adventurous. And then Brother Bear was, again, you know, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, you know, so that whole movie spoke to me in such a way. So I forgot what the other question was, but
would you recommend, like, if you're a
oh yeah, listen, yes, listen, if you can do that, that's awesome. You know, there's nothing like a double threat. There's nothing like going in and pitching an animated project that you're going to write, but you've also got artwork you've done for it. You know, people are like, fuck yeah, one-stop shopping, man. Okay, we dig it. If you can do that, if that's your thing, I mean, you know, that's awesome. And I know people working on animated pitches right now that are both artists and writers. So, you know,
yeah.
I would say, you know, that's something you have to gauge for you, though, in terms of the time in a day, and how, you know, and all that sort of stuff, you know. So
Cool. So one last thing that I would like to do, if everybody's cool with it, is just take a quick, like, little screenshot of our Zoom meeting, so we have a little photo. So if you want your camera on, you can turn it on, and then I will do it. So I'm gonna count to like 30.
are there some shy lurkers in here? Is that what we have?
Hey, Tab. Before we go, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Ron Fleischer. I co-run the animation program at Columbia.
Ron, nice to meet you. I had no
You
idea.
too.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm not like the oldest student here, just in case you were wondering who the heck the guy with the very little white hair was left. I come from the TV side of the industry. I graduated Columbia in 83, 84, something like that, worked in television commercials, and then did a lot of the Warner Brothers shows in the 90s, like Animaniacs and Pinky and the Brain. And stuff.
Oh, wow. That's amazing, dude.
Yeah, and so I had a chance. I worked out.
Well, what are you talking to me for? You should be talking to this guy.
No, I actually quit to come back to Chicago to teach and make my own stupid animated shorts, make my own films.
Oh, that's
so
awesome.
I like it here, but I really do appreciate you taking the time and inspiring and talking to our students. I loved hearing your stories, especially I'm a child of the 60s too, and I'm on a Facebook group. I'm on a Facebook group with these people who are building the original Aurora monster models and painting them like looking like
dude,
100 times better than like what we did as a kid.
You and I would have a lot to talk about, my friend.
But they changed the Hunchback. The Hunchback is now called the Bell Ringer of Notre Dame. I don't know. I don't know if it was political correctness or if maybe they were afraid of getting sued by Disney. But he's the Bell Ringer now.
The PC world has caught up to Aurora.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but that's great to meet you, man.
Yeah, you too. Thank you so much. I really do.
I hope I can come back and we can continue. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
All right, let's get a selfie.
All
A virtual.
ready? So on the count of 3, say cheers. 1, 2, 3. Awesome.